Michael Reynolds was a millionaire admired for his success, and Vanessa Reynolds was the glamorous wife who seemed to complete his perfect life. But behind the mansion walls, their love story was rotting from the inside. When Michael prepared to walk away, Vanessa prepared something far darker. What began as wealth and romance would soon unravel into betrayal, poison, and the shocking tale of a wife who turned love into murder. Michael Reynolds had everything most people only dreamed. Born into a modest family, he built his wealth from the ground up, starting with a small construction business that grew into a multi-million-dollar real estate empire. By the time he reached his mid-40s, Michael was a household name in elite business circles. He was respected, admired, and sometimes even envied. His sharp business instincts and polished public image made him one of the most recognizable figures in the city. But what caught just as much attention as his financial success was his marriage to Vanessa, a woman who seemed to complete the picture of his perfect life. She was strikingly beautiful, always dressed in the latest fashion, her presence demanding attention whenever she entered a room. Together they looked like a couple out of a magazine, the very image of power and glamour. The Reynolds mansion stood at the edge of a private gated community, its tall iron gates and manicured gardens symbolizing the wealth Michael had earned. Guests who entered were always impressed by the marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and expensive art decorating the walls. Vanessa made sure every corner of the house looked flawless, often saying that their home was an extension of their image. They hosted charity galas, cocktail parties, and business dinners, where Vanessa played the perfect hostess, smiling for the cameras and dazzling Michael's associates. To the outside world, theirs was a marriage defined by luxury, stability, and success. Yet, beneath the polished exterior, Michael's private life was beginning to show signs of strain. He worked long hours, often returning home late at night, exhausted from negotiations and endless meetings. He told his closest friends that he sometimes felt more comfortable in his office than in his own house. Vanessa, while graceful in public, had become increasingly demanding behind closed doors. She wanted more than money. She wanted admiration, control, and a constant reminder that she was the center of Michael's world. Michael, consumed by his work, struggled to meet her expectations. The distance between them grew, though neither spoke about it openly. There were subtle signs that things were not as perfect as they appeared. Michael, once known for his wide smile and easy laugh, had grown quieter at social gatherings. He avoided long conversations with acquaintances, often excusing himself early. He spent more time at his office than ever before, preferring the predictable demands of his business over the unpredictable atmosphere of his marriage. On rare occasions, when he did attend parties or events, he would leave early, citing fatigue, leaving Vanessa to charm the crowd on her own. To those who noticed, the change was dismissed as simple stress from his workload. Vanessa, however, seemed unaffected by her husband's growing absence. In fact, she thrived in the spotlight, enjoying the admiration she received when Michael was not around. She developed a reputation for being more than just a wealthy man's wife. She was an image of independence and sophistication. Still, her independence was fueled entirely by Michael's fortune, something he understood but never spoke of. He sometimes wondered if she would still stand beside him if all of it disappeared. As weeks turned into months, friends who once saw him as confident and unshakable began noticing the weight in his eyes. He avoided discussing his marriage, often changing the subject when the topic came up. But his silence spoke louder than words. The image of perfection he had built was beginning to crack. Even if only a few could see it, for the public, the Reynolds remained untouchable. They were a symbol of wealth and success, the kind of couple others aspired to be. But behind the glittering chandeliers and the polished smiles, Michael was living in a house where love had started to feel more like an obligation than a partnership. What no one yet realized was that this unspoken tension was not just the slow decline of a marriage. It was the beginning of a deadly story that would shatter the illusion of their perfect life forever. Michael's life looked as if it was built on a foundation of marble, unshakable and steady. But beneath it, the ground was beginning to shift. As the months passed, the strain in his marriage became harder to ignore. Vanessa had once seemed grateful for the lifestyle her husband's fortune provided, but her gratitude had transformed into expectation. She grew restless in the quiet of their mansion, constantly searching for new ways to occupy her time. Designer shopping trips, spa days, and charity luncheons filled her calendar, yet none of it seemed enough. When Michael returned home at the end of long days, she greeted him not with affection but with criticism about the time he spent at work, the decisions he made without consulting her, or the lack of attention she claimed she deserved to Michael. It felt like he was being pulled in two directions. On one side was his empire, demanding constant focus, with deals that required his sharp eye and steady judgment. On the other was his wife, who demanded not only his presence but also his unwavering devotion. The weight of both left him exhausted. At the office, he was still the confident leader. But the moment he stepped through the doors of his own home, he felt diminished, as if every accomplishment meant nothing once Vanessa began speaking. The house that once symbolized his success began to feel like a gilded cage. Friends close to Vanessa noticed subtle changes in her behavior. She had grown sharper in her comments, often making small jokes about Michael's age or his obsession with work. These remarks, though disguised as light-hearted, carried a sting. In private, she pushed harder. She wanted more access to his business affairs, more control over his financial decisions, and more recognition for the lifestyle she claimed she helped him create. Michael, however, had always been cautious when it came to his fortune. He trusted few people with details of his empire, and Vanessa was not one of them. Behind the scenes, McCall began taking quiet steps toward protecting himself. He contacted his lawyer to discuss the possibility of changing his will. He confided to a trusted colleague that his marriage was no longer what it once was, and that divorce was a thought he could no longer ignore. His assistant noticed him growing more guarded with documents, locking away files he once left on his desk without worry. The cracks in his personal life were beginning to spill over into his professional world. Unbeknownst to Michael, Vanessa had already discovered his intentions. She came across fragments of emails, overheard a tense phone call, and pieced together the truth that her husband was preparing to separate from her. For Vanessa, this was more than just a threat to her marriage. It was a threat to the life she had built, the image she had so carefully crafted. Without Michael, she would lose the mansion, the luxury, and most of all, the status that made her feel powerful. The thought of returning to obscurity filled her with dread. The tension between them grew heavier with every passing day. Conversations turned colder, often punctuated by long silences at the dinner table. When they did speak, the words felt rehearsed, lacking warmth. Michael's distance only fueled Vanessa's determination to secure her position, but the more she pressed, the further he pulled away. It was a cycle that left both of them trapped, unwilling to confront the truth but unable to ignore it. The outward appearance of their lives remained untouched. They still attended social events together, arriving in luxury cars, dressed as the picture of elegance. To the public, nothing seemed amiss. Yet those who looked closely could see the subtle signs, the way Michael's eyes no longer lingered on Vanessa, the way her smile seemed forced when she clung to his arm. They were living in the same house, but inhabiting different worlds. As Michael's plans for a divorce took shape, Vanessa's thoughts darkened. She had married a man who built an empire, but she refused to be cast aside like a forgotten chapter in his story. The fear of losing everything hardened into something sharper, something dangerous. What began as resentment slowly turned into resolve. In her mind, she would not be the one left with nothing. The cracks in the foundation of their marriage were no longer just signs of collapse, they were the opening steps toward a path that would soon prove deadly. The night that would change everything began like any other, but the atmosphere inside the Reynolds mansion was heavy with unspoken tension. Rain tapped against the tall windows, and distant thunder rolled across the sky. Michael was in his study, a room he often retreated to when he needed silence. The space reflected his taste: dark wood shelves lined with books, a large oak desk stacked with documents, and a leather chair that had become his refuge from the turmoil at home. He had planned to meet a business associate for dinner, but exhaustion won out, and he decided to stay in. Instead, he poured himself a glass of red wine and settled into his chair. Upstairs, Vanessa moved quietly through the house. To anyone watching, she would have appeared composed, perhaps even calm, but inside her mind was racing. She had spent weeks contemplating her options, and the thought of losing her grip on the life she had built haunted her. Tonight she was determined to act. She carried herself with the same elegance she displayed at social events. But beneath the polished surface was a plan already in motion. Neighbors later recalled hearing muffled voices coming from the house. Sharper than the usual sounds of domestic life, the storm outside masked most of it, but there were moments when the raised tones cut through the rain. Michael's voice, deep and frustrated, echoed faintly, though what was said would remain a mystery. Hours later, silence fell, leaving only the sound of rain against the windows. When emergency responders arrived, they were met by Vanessa at the door. She appeared distraught, but strangely composed, her makeup intact despite the tears she claimed had been flowing. She told them that Michael had suddenly collapsed in his study. Paramedics rushed inside and found him slumped in his chair. The glass of wine spilled across the desk, dark liquid soaking important papers. His skin was pale, his chest unmoving, and despite every attempt, there was nothing they could do. Michael Reynolds was declared dead before midnight. The initial impression was of a natural tragedy. At 45, even the most successful man was not immune to sudden health failures, and a heart attack seemed plausible. Yet subtle details began to trouble investigators almost immediately. Michael had been in good health, with no significant medical history. His untouched dinner tray was still on the side table, the food cold. The wine glass, knocked onto its side, carried an unusual bitter smell that did not match the aroma of expensive red wine. Even the position of his body raised questions, his hand resting awkwardly near the glass, as if he had tried to push it away rather than drop it. Vanessa's reaction also drew quiet suspicion. Though she spoke with the right words of grief, there was something about her calmness that did not fit the moment. She answered questions without hesitation, offering a story of how Michael had complained of chest pains earlier in the evening before retreating to his study. She claimed she thought little of it, assuming he was simply stressed. She called emergency services only after finding him unresponsive. To the paramedics, her version of events was tidy, almost too tidy. Word of Michael's sudden death spread. Quickly, the business world was shaken, colleagues expressing shock at the loss of a man who seemed unstoppable. News outlets covered the tragedy, showing images of Vanessa in black, standing at the gates of the mansion, shielding her face from cameras. She organized a lavish funeral, ensuring it reflected the grandeur of the life Michael had built. The grieving widow played her role flawlessly, accepting condolences with grace and speaking softly about the man she had lost. But behind the scenes, the authorities were not convinced. The autopsy, delayed by the initial assumption of natural causes, revealed irregularities that demanded closer scrutiny. Toxicology results were ordered, and investigators began revisiting the details of that stormy night. The spilled glass of wine, the unusual scent, the neighbors' accounts of raised voices, each piece of information added to a growing sense that something was terribly wrong. For now, Vanessa remained untouched by suspicion in the public eye. She was the widow of a wealthy man, admired for her composure in the face of tragedy. Yet the storm that had raged outside the night of Michael's death seemed almost prophetic. What appeared on the surface to be a sudden and tragic end was only the beginning of a far darker revelation waiting to come to light the weeks following. Michael's death were marked by an unusual blend of mourning and speculation. To the public, Vanessa was a portrait of sorrow, appearing in black at every public gathering, her voice soft and heavy with grief whenever she spoke about her husband. The mansion was filled with flowers, sympathy cards, and visitors who came to pay respects. Yet behind the scenes, investigators were quietly moving forward with questions that could no longer be ignored. The toxicology tests had come back, and the results shattered the image of a natural death. Michael's bloodstream contained a lethal concentration of digitalis, a powerful drug often used to treat heart conditions in small, controlled doses, but deadly when abused. This was no heart attack. It was poisoning. The discovery shifted the case instantly from tragedy to homicide. Investigators began piecing together a timeline, combing through Michael's personal and financial records. They found that only months before his death, Vanessa had taken out an unusually large life insurance policy on her husband, worth millions. The timing was far from coincidental, and it raised the first serious red flag. Detectives also uncovered emails Michael had sent to his lawyer discussing a possible divorce and plans to alter his will. Those emails hinted at a man preparing to distance himself from his wife, a move that would have left Vanessa with far less than the fortune she enjoyed. Attention turned to Vanessa's behavior in the days surrounding Michael's death. Security. Camera footage from various pharmacies revealed her visiting locations across the city, often wearing scarves, sunglasses, and hats that partially concealed her face. On several occasions, she was recorded purchasing medication linked to digitalis under different names, a pattern that investigators found too precise to be accidental. When detectives confronted the pharmacies, they confirmed that the woman bore a striking resemblance to Vanessa, despite her disguises. These findings transformed suspicion into damning evidence. As investigators dug deeper, they discovered additional irregularities. Bank statements showed unusual transfers of money into accounts linked to Vanessa. Large sums had been withdrawn, without Michael's approval, hidden in a way that suggested she had been preparing for independence long before his death. Conversations with Michael's colleagues and staff revealed he had grown increasingly private and tense in his final weeks. His assistant recalled him mentioning that Vanessa had been prying into business matters she was never allowed to handle, and that he was growing more certain he needed to legally protect himself. His fears, though never made public, seemed to align perfectly with the direction of the investigation. The case against Vanessa was strengthened further when investigators searched the mansion. Among her belongings, they uncovered small notes and receipts linked to the purchase of medications. In a drawer, they found a set of gloves and empty pill bottles, evidence she had failed to dispose of completely. Each new discovery added weight to the prosecution's narrative. Vanessa had carefully planned Michael's death, disguising her actions under layers of elegance and charm. Despite the mounting evidence, Vanessa continued to play the role of the grieving widow in public. She appeared calm during questioning, always insisting she had no knowledge of the toxic substances found in her husband's body. Two friends and supporters. She framed the investigation as an attempt to tarnish Michael's memory, suggesting that jealousy and gossip were at work. But the more she protested, the more determined detectives became. The unraveling of Vanessa's carefully curated life came slowly but surely. The woman who once commanded rooms with her beauty and grace was now being seen in a different light. The tabloids shifted their focus, publishing headlines that referred to her as a suspect rather than a symbol of elegance. Neighbors who once admired her began to speak of her coldness, recalling moments when she seemed detached from Michael, in ways that now seemed sinister. The final blow came when investigators presented their findings to a grand jury. The combination of toxicology reports, financial motives, surveillance footage, and physical evidence from the mansion was overwhelming. A warrant for Vanessa's arrest was issued, and the image she had spent years constructing crumbled in an instant. She was led away from her mansion, no longer dressed in designer gowns, but in handcuffs. Her face captured by flashing cameras. The woman who had once been admired as the perfect partner to a self-made millionaire was now accused of orchestrating his murder. What had begun as whispers of unease behind closed doors had become a storm of evidence that exposed the truth. The story was no longer about a man who died too soon. It was about a marriage poisoned by greed, and a wife whose love had turned deadly. The trial of Vanessa Reynolds became one of the most closely followed cases in recent memory. A spectacle that drew reporters, cameras, and curious crowds to the courthouse every day. What had once been a story of a wealthy man's sudden death had evolved into a chilling account of betrayal, greed, and calculated murder. Prosecutors presented Vanessa as a woman who had grown addicted to the power and luxury her husband's fortune provided, and who, when threatened with the possibility of losing it all, had decided to eliminate the one obstacle in her way. The courtroom was filled with tension as the prosecution carefully built their case. They described how Michael Reynolds had been preparing to file for divorce, a move that would have left Vanessa with far less than the life she demanded. They outlined the life insurance policy she had taken out only months before his death. A policy worth millions? Then came the toxicology report, the undeniable proof that Michael's body contained a lethal concentration of digitalis. The prosecutors explained how Vanessa had visited multiple pharmacies in disguise, collecting medication she had no legitimate reason to purchase. Each piece of evidence painted a picture of a woman who had meticulously planned her husband's death while maintaining the mask of a devoted wife. Witnesses were called to the stand, each adding more weight to the case. Michael's assistant testified about conversations where Michael expressed fear that his wife was prying into his financial affairs. A neighbor recounted hearing heated arguments on the night of his death, voices raised over the sound of the storm. Pharmacists identified Vanessa as the woman who had come in wearing scarves and sunglasses, signing false names to collect prescriptions. Even Michael's lawyer testified, revealing that Michael had contacted him just days before his death to revise his will and protect his assets from his wife. The pieces aligned too neatly to be dismissed as coincidence. The defense, and while attempted to paint a different picture, they described Vanessa as a loving wife, devastated by the sudden loss of her husband, insisting that the prosecution was twisting ordinary details into sinister narratives. They suggested that Michael's business rivals may have had motives to harm him, or that the toxic substances in his system could have been the result of an accidental overdose or tampering by someone else. But as the days passed, the weight of evidence against Vanessa became impossible to ignore. Her calm demeanor, once her strength, began to work against her. Jurors observed how rarely she showed emotion, even when graphic details of her husband's final moments were read aloud. The mask of composure she had worn for so long now appeared cold and unfeeling. Media outlets dubbed her the Black Widow, a nickname that spread quickly across headlines and talk shows. Every photograph of Vanessa leaving the courthouse was scrutinized, every gesture analyzed for hidden meaning. Once admired for her beauty and grace, she was now portrayed as a symbol of deceit. The nation watched as her carefully built image unraveled in front of the cameras. After weeks of testimony, closing arguments were delivered, and the jury retreated to deliberate. The wait was short. Within hours, they returned with their verdict. Vanessa Reynolds was found guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom fell silent as the words were read aloud. Vanessa sat motionless, her face pale but expressionless, as though she had prepared herself for this moment. For many, the lack of visible emotion was further confirmation of the coldness described throughout the trial. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The woman, who had once walked red carpets and hosted lavish galas, was now led away in handcuffs, her designer clothes replaced by a prison uniform. Behind bars, she became just another inmate, stripped of the luxury she had once clung to so fiercely. For Michael's family and friends, the verdict brought a bittersweet sense of closure. His fortune was divided among his relatives and charitable organizations, ensuring that his legacy would not be erased by the betrayal that ended his life. The story of Michael and Vanessa Reynolds became more than just another headline. It was a cautionary tale about the dangers hidden behind closed doors. Reminder that sometimes the greatest threats come not from strangers, but from the person closest to you. The fall of Vanessa Reynolds was complete. She had entered the public eye as the wife of a self-made millionaire, admired for her elegance and charm, but she would be remembered as the Black Widow, the woman who turned love into a weapon and marriage into a motive for murder. Her name became a warning, her story, a dark echo of how greed and ambition can twist devotion into something lethal.